Hey students, so we're still in the middle of chapter 10, which we have jumped to early in the semester because we're telling a story with this cultural geography class this semester. And so when we talk about demographics like we have in previous weeks, and we look at population growth and migration and all these kinds of things, a lot of times the push factors and the pull factors, or population growth and boom anyway, with crude birth rate increasing and crude death rate decreasing and populations growing, a lot of times the credit for these kinds of changes in demographics or push and pull factors that govern migration, a lot of times it has to do with development. When we look at Human Development Index, those kinds of concepts like higher education, longer life expectancy, being able to have job opportunities and things like this comes from development and industrialization within a country. Okay, and so this is a section toward the end of chapter 12 in the 12th edition. Chapter 10 in the 12th edition. It's on development, and toward the end there's a section on problems with development. And really, I should have a question mark up here because some of these things are a matter of debate. Really, when it says problems with development, we need to go back. We need to do a flashback to week 1, I think it was, when we talked about what globalization is and how we live in a continually, progressively interconnected world where manufacturing and industry and making products and trading even the foods that we eat come from, we can have rice in Stuttgart, Arkansas that's sold in the Philippines and at Vietnam and all over, places like that. And so this is part of, I've got on here the supply chain, for instance, and Western dominance, corrupt governments, all of these different kinds of things, because we have these different ways of analyzing why and what these development theories are, like world systems theory, which we've covered, or modernization theory. These are ideas about how dynamics and relationships among different types of countries work, but also they are ideas about how perhaps Human Development Index issues can have a higher quality within the confines of different nations. So you've heard of first world versus third world countries. There's a really different standard of living from one place to the next, and based on a Western standard, which may or may not be a problem when we are talking about countries like Bhutan, that you've already seen some information about the gross domestic happiness or gross national happiness in Bhutan. That particular government, that particular nation and culture knew that they were not going to want to compete in these development kind of circles that international rankings use to classify nations. And so they kind of turned it on its ear and developed a new way of thinking about life in general. And so maybe it's not all about money. Maybe it's not all about improving your standard of living, because does everybody really need to have, a Big Mac and fries to be happy? That's maybe an American thing, but it's not necessarily going to be a standard for human existence around the world. And so Western dominance is part of what maybe one of the problems with development is, because the kind of development, the kind of urbanization that pretty much is the focus of development theories and improvements in Human Development Index issues, it comes from a very Western culture point of view. It's biased toward Western culture. I've got on here also, down in the corner over here, the International Monetary Fund. That's what IMF stands for, and the World Bank. These are two agencies that exist in the world to loan money specifically to provide grants, but also loan money specifically to underdeveloped nations, or nations on the periphery or in the semi-periphery, depending upon which of those development theories you're going to apply to this. And these are dominated by the United States and Europe, because the International Monetary Fund is always headed by a European, and the World Bank always has an American at the helm. And so these are the glasses, the lens, the bias, if you will, that these agencies use. And because they're based on international commodities, globalization of trade, and gross domestic product, gross national product, and all of those other calculations that we've learned earlier in this chapter. When commodities change prices, like your textbook in the 12th edition will talk about how oil prices changed in the 1970s, and so some nations who had taken loans to increase development within their border had to default and became even worse off than they were before, because now they owed all this money that they weren't able to repay to the International Monetary Fund or to the World Bank or other agencies that were supposedly there to help them get a leg up and compete better and increase the standard of living and style of life for the people who lived within those nations. There's a whole bunch of other issues that arise with development and industrialization, industrialized capitalism, and ignoring the fact that there are human beings at the core of economic exchange. Things like corruption with governments, and so sometimes maybe a government applies for some of these funds that are available through agencies like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank or even the United Nations, brokers deals for development and urbanization, which we'll talk about in the future. But there are a lot of problems because social stratification, which we've talked about before, inequality in society, can get exacerbated with efforts toward industrialization. You end up with, like we discussed when we looked at the demographic transition model, you end up with greater divisions in wealth versus poverty, and also greater divisions with males and females, with young and old, lots of different categories of people that begin to be differentiated from each other within the culture because of their relationship to the development process, because of their relationship to the economic processes, because of their contribution, the possibility for them to contribute, and what can they put toward development or industrialization. And so you see huge impact on social stratification, and even though it can increase wealth, you still see big divides among the nations of the world, certainly, but even within developed nations, such as the United States, you see big gaps between wealth versus poverty. You see gender roles, meaning males and females, that public-private dichotomy that is assigned to males and females in the workforce or in the domestic field, that is still there and part of the social structure. You see these things highlighted and exacerbated. You see trade agreements happen between governments that might be corrupt governments. We don't know, but you end up with these functional zones that are negotiated with different geopolitical powers so that supposedly the supply chain will work better and we will have a constant flow of products and consumerism or food in some cases from one location to the next. So all of these different issues. Oh, yeah, and I didn't point yet to slavery or human trafficking. Human trafficking is, of course, the buzzword that we talk about today, the social issue, the social problem that we focus on so much and try to eradicate. But let's just say it by a more common term that we know, slavery. It is slavery. And slavery is not over. It's simply not state-sanctioned in the United States anymore. And but slavery is not over. And it exists all over the world, and just ask people who did some service in Iraq or Afghanistan or any other places in the Middle East and had an opportunity, I say opportunity like that's a happy thing, but had the unfortunate opportunity to witness flea markets and bazaars where you actually could go up to a booth and the product they were selling was young children. For whatever use, they don't care. You want to be the highest bidder, you can take this boy home with you. And so slavery is not over. Human trafficking is the modern buzzword for it. But all of these things, people become commodities too if you need workers. That's part of the population debate that we have in society today. Do we have enough workers? Is it that we need more education so the workers have a higher skill when they enter the job force? Or on the flip side of that, some people say that the reason development is not achievable in some places, or the reason you see extreme poverty, is because of too many people. Too many people are being born. And so think back to those population pyramids where you saw a great big fat section on the very bottom. That means there's a huge amount of people being born. And those people take social resources to bring them up. And so some of those population pyramids that were really fat on the top and then went really narrow toward what should be, in your mind and my mind, middle-aged life. There are some life expectancies, which, remember, life expectancy is one of the measurements on the Human Development Index. There are some countries with life expectancies below 50, as like 50 is like really old to get there. Chad, in the middle of Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, other places that we have mentioned have really low life expectancies. And so that brings their Human Development Index grading down. And when you look at the level of development, there is a correlation there. And so some people will say, okay, well, then we need to develop it. And so there's the Western dominance again, because it's like, it's a little bit of paternalism if you want to look at it in that way. And other people say, no, it's an obligation because, we have more than we need and we need to help others. And so there's kind of like this disagreement on how the world should work. But it seems to be, in cultural geography circles at least, in government organizations and in non-governmental organizations, a lot of the international push for assistance in non-governmental organizations focuses a lot on development issues. And I'm sorry, my cat is getting my feet. Sorry, go on, Pudgy. Anyway, and these things are usually in line with improving social conditions, improving style of life for the people on the ground. And so there's a lot of effort with non-governmental organizations in addition to governmental organizations in trying to bring development to more places on the earth. And so there's that globalization, that interconnectedness, and increasing progress toward one worldness that we look at in geography. And some people don't like that either when you talk about it from a political ramification standpoint. So, okay, so the next video that you're going to see in this folder is going to be that one from the Why channel on YouTube. And it's going to look at poverty. I think it's called Stealing Africa. And it's going to look at poverty in Africa and Switzerland and look at the difference there that can be highlighted in those two different cultural systems. Okay, see you next time. Bye.